Here we go. Okay guys, I'm Ryan. I threw the slides up in a PDF, so you could also look at them on your phone and kind of follow along. I kind of realized that it's hard to see some of the smaller text. So if you want, you can go download them, follow along. We're going to be talking about attacking Active Directory. The whole plan for this was to kind of make a hacking series and go through the different tools and techniques pen testers use when they're trying to basically take over your company or take over your Active Directory environment first, and then maybe some more loot they're going to try to find with that. So again, I'm Ryan. I'm a full-time pen tester with Depth Security. We're here in Kansas City, downtown. On Slack, I'm awesome if you want to go say what's up. So Active Directory, I'm going to start off with a quick definition, or I'm going to try. It's going to be like the worst definition of Active Directory you've ever heard if you've ever taken a class, but that's fine. Active Directory is defined by Microsoft as the Active Directory service is a distributed database that stores and manages information about network resources as well as application-specific data from directory-enabled applications. So what's that mean? Active Directory is a giant list of objects. Everything in Active Directory is an object. It's mainly defined by these, for what we're going to be talking about, the forest and the domain. So what's a forest? A forest is this complete instance of Active Directory. It's a top-level container. A container is also an object in Active Directory that contains other objects. And this is your security boundary. I think a lot of times it gets kind of confused whether your domains are security boundaries, but they're not really. Your forest is your security boundary. So what's a domain? A domain is another type of container object. This is the administrative boundary, so you can apply things administratively to your whole domain at once or individual objects, but yeah, everything's an object. So there's users. I've got this great little graphic with my triangle of users, their systems, resources, services. Everything's an object, and everything that is an object has attributes. Attributes are just things like names, IP addresses, locations, permissions. If you look up someone at your company and you see their phone number, that's like an attribute to their user object. And they call it active because it's always changing. All this data is being replicated throughout the whole domain and the whole forest at all times. And all these attributes are creating relationships and groups amongst all the objects. And that's a really bad overview of Active Directory and what it really is. So, moving on. Attacking Active Directory. I didn't want this to get confused with a pen test. So I do pen testing normally, but an Active Directory attack isn't necessarily going to be considered a full pen test, okay? So this is just looking at really the post-exploitation phase of a pen test. Like a generic pen test, there's lots of definitions out there, but you start off with scoping, and then you have recon, and you have scanning, exploitation, post-exploitation. So this is kind of after we've already gotten onto a network. It is a mini pen test. You could consider it because you're going to do some recon on Active Directory. You're going to do some scanning amongst all the objects, and maybe some exploitation. But I just didn't want that to get confused with this isn't just a pen test. There's a lot more to a pen test than just attacking Active Directory. So what's all involved? Are we dropping these sweet 0 days, flinging them around your network, or what exactly is happening when a pen tester comes in to attack? Not really, and a lot of times after we've got our initial vector in there, we're not using any exploits at all from that point. We're just looking for weaknesses in the configurations of your Active Directory environment. And we're going to use some tools and look at some tools later about discovering these hidden and a lot of times unintended relationships between all these objects and all those attributes that are applied that not everyone's really aware of. So what's the point of attacking Active Directory? Well, ideally, we want to get all the users' passwords. That's always good to have. But a little bit further than that, we want to find loot, maybe things that they think are important. So if you're attacking a bank, you probably want to find their finances or their bank accounts and all the info there. And in the end, we want to provide some remediation and detection advice. And through this series, I kind of want to, this first one's going to be the overview of like the whole thought process and theory behind like what an attacker is going after. And then we'll do some tool talks, and ideally then we'll do some how we can actually find these attackers inside our network. Because even though you have a bunch of firewalls and a lot of antivirus protection, when I've got one of your users' credentials, I'm not using any exploits to RDP into another box if I have their creds, you know? So, but there is ways we can still find these people. So the basic theory, I don't know how well we can, you probably can't read that from too far away, but this is the start here, and we're gonna loop through this, but if you think about it, and this is a really awful way to really explain your external attack surface, but there's 3 primary entry points for an attacker. There's the web servers, that's anything you're hosting that's facing the internet, right? So that's, everyone kind of knows that. You can have your SQL injection or whatever getting in on there. That's another reason why your domain admin should never log into a web server that's hosting anything. Your users, that's where I'm talking about email, or if they're out clicking on links or surfing the internet and they get hacked somehow, they've been taken over. And then I think one that kind of gets missed is like a VPN. If you've got a VPN on the outside and you don't have 2-factor auth, and I can guess one of those users' passwords, I'm kind of already inside your network with the valid user's credentials. And that's all I need, really, to escalate up to domain admin in most cases. So back to start. We start off and we get some credentials. So how do we get credentials besides just password guessing on your VPN? If we've compromised a box, we can run like something like Responder, and I do plan on going through these like more in detail using the actual tools coming up, but Responder, you can kind of capture creds that are flying around your network, and you can either relay them if SMB signing isn't turned on, or you can actually capture the hashes and crack those hashes and then have creds already. You can pass the hash. Password spraying is a lot more commonly used to get into networks than I think people realize, and you've got people with passwords like summer 2017 that is a lot more common than you would think. Like if you're in an organization of over 1,000 users, I guarantee you someone there has winter 17 or summer 17 or autumn 17 as their password. And we can scrape the internet as an attacker for email addresses that are out there and then just brute force essentially, but really it's the same password against all your users that are on the internet. And if you don't have 2-factor auth on, I've already got a way in, and I'm gonna look like a normal user on your network. There is actual exploits too, so with the web servers, we can get SQL injection or a deserialization vulnerability or some of those MS vulns, and then post-compromise, once we've got on a box, we're gonna be using Mimikatz to kind of extract credentials out of memory, or you can prop dump LSAS, stuff we'll get into a little bit deeper. You'd be surprised how many times I've seen a password CSV or passwords.txt on someone's desktop, where you open that up and it's every password to every machine they've ever logged into. And then things like GPP, passwords and sysvol, and Kerber roasting. I don't want to get into that too much right now, but so we get creds. We're back in our loop. The attacker grabs the creds. They're going to check if they're high privilege or not. And what I mean by high privilege is the end game is we're trying to get a domain admin, right? But we don't necessarily just need a domain admin. There's lots of different accounts that can basically become domain admins or already have the rights to access the domain controller. All of these accounts here are considered these like tier 0 accounts. And this is just, these are the built-ins by default. You can also have groups that were defined in Active Directory that have the same kind of privileges. But after we find out our user doesn't have high privileged access, then we look to spread. So, and I'll slow down and go through this a little bit better coming up, but if I've got in on your network because I guessed someone's password, I'm going to see where they can go access. A lot of times domain users have local admin like across the network. Or whatever box I get onto, if I dump the hashes and realize that you're using the local admin hash everywhere, I can now log into any box, and all I got to do is try to find one of those domain admins or privileged accounts. And so now we're going to spread, and we're going to look for where are those privileged users, where can the user that I currently have credentials for go, and how can I get to those high privileged accounts. So I'm going to be looking for the paths that get me there. And there are lots of ways to identify access for a current user. Metasploit's got a few modules with SMB logins where you can just spray around the user's credentials that you have and possibly log into a lot of machines or a few machines. Nmap's got scripts. There's command line where you can just look for the groups they're in. You can run some PowerShell. There's a lot of PowerView and Empire modules that will automate all this for you. And after we've identified our access, we're going to move, and we're going to migrate to a new host. And the idea here is that I get into your system, and then I find out where that guy can go, and I'm going to move to another box, see who all's been logged into there, get all their credentials, and see where they can go. And it's going to kind of loop around in that process. And there's just lots of ways you can identify this access. There's also lots of ways you can migrate to these new hosts. There's lots of simple ways once you have credentials like PSExec or NetSH or WMI. There's pass the hash, golden ticket, skeleton keys, all these really, not even really that advanced techniques that I can use where I'm not really exploiting anything. I'm just using those credentials I have. Sometimes you do need to exploit another box if your person has no paths, but we'll get into that. And there's a lot, people think their external perimeter is like their main security boundary, but they don't realize once someone's inside, if you have admin on all your Tomcat servers that aren't exposed to the internet, I can still take advantage of that as just a normal user inside your network. I was talking about lateral movement one time a little more in depth, and someone told me that pass the hash was fixed, and Microsoft solved this with a fix that came out in 2014. But there's been a recent post by Harmjoy about this, and this is kind of just like a side note because someone called me on it, but and yeah, they did fix where accounts that are members of the local group administrators and are no longer able to execute code with WMI or PSExec. So I can't get an admin user's hash and spray it. But that doesn't apply for local admin or the default administrator group. So if you're not using like something like Laps in your environment, if I get any machine and I dump its hash, I can spray that hash and log in everywhere if you're using the same admin password. And this also doesn't apply to domain accounts that were granted privileges but aren't part of the local admins group. Another thing they didn't really cover when they fixed that is you can have an up-to-date environment, disable your default administrator account, and if I have creds for a local admin user from a different box, RDP still works if I have clear text credentials. But it's kind of just like a side note there. So back to the theory. So we've migrated to a new host, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use something like Mimikatz to just extract the memories out of extract the passwords out of memory, and then we're going to check if we have any high privilege users, identify the access and spread out, and then migrate to a new host again. And so I'm going to try to visualize this a little better. So we've got Bob's password. He's got summer 2017 or something, and I've logged into your network now on your VPN. So that's not going to show up in any of the logs. It's something malicious, right? So Bob can access, or he has a session on like these two computers. So I can log into both these computers as Bob by remoting in. And these computers, or servers, whatever they are, happen to have some other users logged in. So they've got Joe is logged into this one, and John and Alice are over here on this machine. Yeah. So then we're going to find out that John also has a session on this lower machine. And so now I can jump into this top box, get John's creds, and also be able to log into this machine down here.
Hey Ryan,
where...
How do you get John's creds on that first box?
So that's going to be through something like Mimikatz, or we can also impersonate his token if he's passed delegation tokens. Once we have a shell on that machine and we get local admin, which is oftentimes either granted to everyone or something as simple as like git system, surprisingly. But like with the Mimikatz fix, they did remove, so I can't pull the clear text creds out of like wdigest. But what I can do, if you have Exchange set up, those creds will show up in clear text still. Or if I have his hash and he falls into those other categories, I can do that. But if you do drop in, which I need to, once we get into the tool talk specifically, we'll see this a little better, but if John's logged in and I can impersonate his user token, then his user token has the same security context to allow me to log into this box at the bottom here. So once we do that, we find Mary who's logged into this box, and it's the same techniques. We either impersonate their token or we're going to dump their credentials. Once we've done that, you can figure out that Mary is a part of this group, the SQL admins, and the SQL admins can access this other machine, and so Mary can access that machine now. We log into that box and we find our domain admin Steve. And so this used to be for attackers a very manual process where we'd have to basically just do that. You'd have to just keep on spreading, and you'd have 50 shells up inside Empire or Metasploit, and each one you have to go enumerate for all the sessions that are active on the boxes and see if you can impersonate their tokens and then spread out. And that's where some of these new tools are coming in, where once I really just have Bob's access to the network, I can just query Active Directory for where all this information is. And that's just as a regular domain user. And so that's kind of the scary part about it, is that anyone can ask the domain controller who's got sessions where and all these, what permissions they have and what groups they have. And then back to our, we've got privileges. We finally found Steve. We've got a high privileged account. So now we've got domain admin on your network and we win. It's like the happy time for the attacker because they finally get to do their hash dance, and a lot of, we also used to have to actually like either add a new domain admin as using the domain admin, or you have to manually log into the DC and then hash dump the DC. But now we can just DC sync, which is simply a tool where if you have domain admin credentials, you imitate that you're a new DC on the network, and then how the Active Directory works with how it's always replicating data. All your domain controllers are constantly doing syncs, like every 30 minutes, I think, by default. Well, you basically set up and say, hey, I'm a new DC on the network, I need to get in sync with everyone, and then the DC just passes you all the information you need and every user's hash so that you can also authenticate other users, but you're actually not really a DC, and so you've now got everyone's password, there's volume shadow copy, NTDS extract, more things we can touch, and then they can really embed themselves with things like golden tickets, which I don't recommend anyone actually try on their domains because it's really hard to get rid of. It's something like you have to shut down AD for I think like 10 hours and have the password reset twice before it actually goes away. And so if someone generates a golden ticket, which you can do with Mimikatz, and that'll be part of the Mimikatz talk, but they can essentially give themselves a ticket granting ticket in your domain that can auth anybody to any machine or any service at any time. And yeah, those aren't great, but you're not totally done once you've got domain admin. You want to look at things that are important. What's that company value? You know, if they're a software development company, you might want to steal all their code base, which is a lot of times accessible to an open, like internal GitHub. You know, like you want to auth everything inside as well as externally. And also you can look at things like enterprise admin. Enterprise admins can own every domain that's inside the forest. So you might have other forests. I mean, some companies have a lot of forest and domains inside them. Other ones don't. But there's also like the Unix environments. You're not going to have access to that directly with AD, but a lot of times you can jump onto someone's computer and steal their SSH keys that lets you off to any of the Unix environments. And so that's the basic theory around attacking Active Directory. So nothing's really using exploits. Like Mimikatz isn't necessarily an exploit because you can manually do what Mimikatz does. You can take a proc dump of LSASS and find the MD4 encrypted passwords out of there and decrypt them and have people's passwords. So it's not something you can really patch against. And I think a lot of people just think if you put up a lot of antivirus and protections against exploits, that's going to save you. But when I can just use the permissions that are already granted to a user, I'm not going to show up against any antivirus. And so this is kind of like the plan of the tools that at least I use pretty frequently inside Active Directory that I'm planning on talking about. I didn't think I'd have enough time to really cover like Empire or Metasploit for like your command and control servers, and then crackmapexec and responder and Impacket, Inveigh, things like that. So that's going to be in January, hopefully. We'll start with the command and control servers, and then we'll start after that with like different tools we can use to spray those credentials, where we can get those credentials and steal tokens, all that fun stuff. And then I did have Bloodhound I wanted to talk about because I'd like to kind of get through that a little quickly. Bloodhound's a recent project. I guess it's been out for like 2 years, by Waldo, Captain Jesus, and Harmjoy. And this is kind of that process where we've automated that whole trying to find out where my user has access, if that access is linked to any box that has a domain admin on it, or a user that also has a link to domain admin on it. And it's based off a project called AD Controls Paths by these two French guys, Lucas Bouillat and Emmanuel Grasse. I thought it was kind of interesting is like these guys had most of Bloodhound done in 2014, I think, and like the whole ACL update that they recently came out with, and but it's like all their stuff is in French and the PDFs on it are in French, and so I think they just didn't market it enough, and these Bloodhound guys just took the idea, polished it a little, turned it all into English, and built Bloodhound. But yeah, I mean, that's a really cool project. Like their latest release was called the Who Can Read the CEO's Email Edition. And that's kind of saying where you have a user and you say, show me a path to the CEO's email, and it maps it out for you, like what box you need to jump on. So Bloodhound's great for both red and blue teams. I think they tout a lot about the blue teams can use this to find all these unintended, like a lot of times if you need a big domain, and you just query for all the groups in that domain, you're gonna look at like 100 different groups. And it's hard to keep track of over the years, like who's part of what group can change passwords for other users, and this tool can like automate all that for you really well. It can quickly identify these control relations between objects in Active Directory. It looks something like this, which I'm sure you probably can't read much. Walk forward on this thing. So like this is kind of showing that same thing. So like these green dots are users and the yellow dots are either machines or groups. And so like this user is a part of this group, who's inside this group, who's inside another group that this other user is a part of. And so now I can, I think further down, like that group can force password change on this other user, which this is stuff that would be really hard just as an attacker to like figure out without logging into like all your systems. But when I can just query AD and find this path, it makes it really easy where I might only need to compromise one machine in the whole network to be able to get a domain admin. And then things with like DC sync, I never even need to log into the DC to ever get all your users' passwords. And so it's really good at identifying these highly complex attack paths and visualize them in graphs. It's been ran on like really large environments, and so if you have a big environment and you run it, it might look something like this. This is obviously a lot more machines and a lot of users, but you can see all these unintended connections, and like, this might really be all these users just logged into their workstations, but because of all their groups and attributes and permissions, you can just laterally spread across these networks. And they talk about like the 6 degrees of separation. You kind of think of like that, where I know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy that can hang out with Kevin Bacon. Yeah, exactly. And setting up Bloodhound, just real quickly, you can install Bloodhound now in Kali with just an apt update and apt install Bloodhound. And then it will take care of the Neo4j server install that we'll set up, and then you can just run Bloodhound and launch it. And I do have this up and running, hopefully. Let me see here. I'll show you just a little. Maybe I should mirror my screen first. Did it show up? Yeah. Right, so Bloodhound. So basically just to run Bloodhound, which we'll go over with the Empire review module because it's built in, it's a PowerShell script. You call invoke Bloodhound. There's different objects and properties you can collect, but by default it's just going to kind of run the basic attributes of every user and every session that they have up across the network, and then all the groups and how all those are all related. And so you just run invoke Bloodhound. It's going to output 4 CSVs with like the trust and the groups and the users and the sessions. You load them into Bloodhound and you'll get something like this. And this is kind of just like a view, and you can type in any user's name. This is kind of like a generic setup one to not show any like customers' data. But it's got these nice little queries where I can just kind of find like, what's my shortest path to domain admin, or like this view is, so where are my logged in admins? All right, and so this is going to show all these users on the right side have sessions on all these machines. And so I know those are the machines I need to target if I ever want to get a domain admin's hash, or if I want to be able to impersonate them. If they're logged in, I can impersonate them. And then you can find like the shortest path to domain admins, and it'll run a little query, and this is kind of that same idea. So if I've only got this user out here, a Ward, he does have a path to domain admin. It might take me a lot more groups and boxes I have to navigate through, but you'd be surprised how many of your users that should have no way to be a domain admin have a clear path there just because of where they can log into. And that's mostly what I wanted to cover for today, because I think I need to spend a lot more time showing what Bloodhound's gathering and then how to actually run these tools. But I wanted to give everyone kind of a general sense of like, it's not just like scanning your network and trying to find exploits and hack into your DC or hack into a bunch of different boxes. A lot of times there's a lot of easy paths where it's a lot harder to detect when the user isn't doing anything malicious and they're just jumping around your network, either impersonating users or stealing their credentials somehow. And so yeah, in January, I hope, we'll be talking about setting up all those C2 servers and starting to actually attack stuff. So, thanks. Oh. What?
So I got 2 questions.
Yeah.
Hey Ryan, it's Bill.
Sure.
I'm going to ask questions.
I can't see you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what kind of credentials do you need to run Bloodhound?
You need any domain user, just a domain user. Nothing elevated, no privileges, nothing. And you can run it from any workstation that supports PowerShell. And if you have, I mean, we could go over it later, like there's lots of ways you can get around if you're like whitelisting PowerShell. There's lots of ways to launch it, but essentially you need PowerShell.
Shit.
Any user. So go home and run this. I'm sure somewhere, like a large company would be one of those massive, ridiculous. I know Malcolm Vetters talked here before, the guy that's like a head red teamer at Walmart, and he has some amazing graphs running Bloodhound at Walmart that are just insane. But yeah.
From a defender side, can we detect that the usage of Bloodhound?
Yes, yes we can. And I do plan on having a full talk on just detecting these non-exploit kind of reconnaissance stuff. And I have really started to like Microsoft's ATA, their Advanced Threat Analytics. It throws up a nice dashboard and it will instantly tell you if any user did something weird like query for where every user's logged in and where every single machine is on the whole network. But yeah, Microsoft's ATA, at least for one, that's not promoting any specific product, will detect this.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions about, I guess, I want to clear up anything about like attacking Active Directory and pen testing in general. So if you have any questions about that.
What's January?
January, I want to kind of pick back up. Dave Hull talked a little bit about Empire and getting that set up, but I figured I'd start first with the command and control servers. That's how we're going to be talking and pivoting through the network. And then next we can go with the tools that are used to like spray around credentials and some different like Metasploit modules to like enumerate the network. And we can look at some stealthier ways to avoid something like Microsoft ATA, but yeah. After that, ideally we'll do some defensive, how do we detect this? And then I'll show you some other really scary stuff where some guys have thought it'd be great if, so we've got this nice little attack path, well what if I could just take this file, feed it to a program, and it'll auto-execute that attack path for me. And so now I can just fire this up, and once I get that guy in your network that's got Summer 17, it'll be about 5 minutes until I have a domain admin. I can just fire it off, it'll automate the whole process and be done.
That's it, I'm done. See you later.
Yep. Yeah.
That was going to be my next question, was what's the average time, once you get a user's credentials, what's the average time to final?
So it depends on like if we're trying to be really stealthy or if we just want to get it over with quick. The problem with a lot of these monitoring tools is that someone actually has to monitor them.
Yeah.
And so if it's down in the corner, it doesn't take long once I have my attack path to just step on through and have domain admin. And once I DC sync or have all your creds, then I can just log out and I don't need to log back in for whenever, like now I've got every user's password and who knows when they'll actually figure that out. But it has been a lot quicker. There's also tools like DeathStar that will automate from, when you use Responder, that's a tool we can go over where a lot of times, like if you are authing to a printer to print something, you're sending your NTLM creds across the network, and this tool will take them, which they're not crackable hashes, they're like net NTLM version 2, and it will relay them to a different box with the command different than print, like login or send me a shellback or launch a command window, and